Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Our speaker today is Dr. Stephen Gianvecchio from MITRE Corporation. His topic today is detecting bots in online games using human observational proofs. So any of you who have ever played an online game, this may be of particular interest to you.
Okay.
Stephen?
Thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to be presenting some research on detecting bots in online games. This was part of my thesis while I was a student at the College of William & Mary. So I did this research with some of my fellow students there and with my advisor, Dr. Wong. And I'm, of course, now affiliated with the MITRE Corporation. So here's briefly what I'm going to go over. I'm going to give you some background on online games and talk about the cheating problem, specifically about bots. After that, I'm going to go through and describe the gameplay characterization study that we did. And then I'll present our prototype HOP system, which is based on the results of that study. And then I'll discuss some experiments we performed to evaluate that system against game bots. And then I'll briefly discuss a few limitations of our research, and then I'll wrap up. So, just to give you a little bit of background, online games have, of course, become very popular. If you look at figures from 2010, we saw online game revenues grow to about $14.5 billion, and roughly half that figure comes from what are called massively multiplayer online games, or MMOGs. And one of the most popular MMOGs is the game World of Warcraft. And one thing that's kind of interesting as far as revenues is that 2010 figure is about twice what we saw in 2008. So these revenues are also growing very rapidly. Something else that's interesting about MMOGs is that you can take the in-game currency, which is something like gold pieces, and then you can basically trade that for real money. So because of this, there's a real profit motive. Players can actually make real money. Some people actually play as a job and then sell the items that they gather, or even sell their characters. So this makes cheating in MMOGs a major problem. Game bots are one form of cheating, so that's a common way that people take advantage of the game. And what essentially game bots do is they play the game for you. So you could be asleep or you could be at work, and your game bot could be in the game gathering up gold, earning experience. They're able to amass huge amounts of gold by basically playing the game endlessly. And because of this, they hurt the game economy. So they cause hyperinflation. They reduce the value of other people's gold that was earned legitimately. Clearly players don't like this, and the game companies also are being hurt by it. So to combat game bots, there are a few different approaches that you can use. One approach is to use a process monitor. An example of that is something called the Warden, which works with World of Warcraft. And what that process monitor does is it basically scans the system, and it looks for game bots, or looks for other programs that could be used to cheat in the game. Another approach that you can use is what are called human interactive proofs. So that's a more general term for systems like CAPTCHA. So you present someone with a test, they have to read some obfuscated text in order to prove that they're human. And then yet another approach that you can take as a game company is that you can actually take legal action against someone and sue them for making a bot or a cheat program for your game. So one of the popular bots that was created for the World of Warcraft is something called Glider. So Glider basically plays the game automatically. It controls the game by using mouse and keyboard APIs. So it essentially clicks on things in the game, presses keys, and it does all this through the Windows APIs for controlling the mouse and the keyboard. It also has something called profiles. So profiles are a way of setting up the bot with certain configurations, so you can tell it what monsters to fight. And you also give it a series of waypoints. So waypoints tell it where to go in the game. So they make a path. And then the bot will follow that path as it moves through the game. Something else that is kind of neat about the glider software is that it's able to evade the detection that is done by the warden system. So it does this by using rootkit techniques in order to hide itself so that when the warden scans, it's not able to find the glider bot. And it uses some other techniques. So Blizzard actually, having trouble using its technical approaches to detect glider, decided to sue the company that was selling glider and the associated service. They actually won their case, and they were awarded $6.5 million in damages, and MDY had to stop selling the glider bot. So at this point, now that we've looked at some of the issues here, I'm going to talk about the study that we did in characterizing gameplay. So specifically, what we're characterizing is the behavior of the user in terms of user input, that is the mouse and keyboard controls for the game. So the setup that we used is that we installed World of Warcraft on our test system, and we used a third-party program called RUI. RUI stands for Recording User Input. We made a few modifications to this program. Basically, what the program does is it records raw user input events. So these are individual mouse movements where it changes the cursor position, button press, button release events, and other user input events. So we modified the program so it would convert these raw events into higher level user input actions. So for example, if you had a series of moves followed by a press and a release, we would convert this into a high level action, which would be a point and click action. And then we would also compute we'd compute statistics of these user input actions. So these would be things like the speed that the mouse was moving. So next, what we did was we set up the glider bot, and we configured 10 different profiles with different sets of waypoints. And then we went ahead and we ran the glider bot for 40 hours, collecting traces of its user input events. Half of these were done with a warrior character, and the other half were done with a mage character. That way we have some variety. And the levels were generally low, anywhere from level 1 up into the mid-30s for the character. We also used the same setup to record traces of humans playing the game. So we had volunteers that we collected data from. We had a total of 30 humans, and we collected 55 hours of their traces. And this was a fairly diverse group. The volunteers were about 80% men, but we had about 20% women. A wide range of ages. The largest category was 25 to 34. That's partly because many of our volunteers were graduate students, but we also had some players, some older players, including a player over 45, and a few college-age players. As far as gaming experience, we had a wide variety of different experience levels. We had about 20% of players had never played games before, and we also had about 30% that had played 10 years or more. As far as location, we ran some of our experiments on a test system in our lab, and we also distributed the software to players that were willing to play at home. Only 10% decided to play at home, so most of our study was done in a lab environment, which does affect variations such as the hardware that's being used and other software on the system. As far as the the characters that players chose. About 30% of those were magic damage dealing classes like mages, and about 70% were physical damage classes like warrior or hunter. And then the levels were mostly low levels, mostly under 10, about 80%. And then we had a handful of players that played their pre-existing characters, and those characters were in the 20s and 30s. So next I'm going to talk about the statistics that we looked at. So the first statistic that we looked at was keystroke inner arrival time distributions. What you see here on the right in blue is the human distribution, and on the left in red is the bot distribution. So for the human distribution, we found that these were well fit by a Pareto distribution. And then for the bot distribution, we saw that there were a higher proportion of fast keystrokes. So those are keystrokes where subsequent keys were pressed with a short time interval. And there are also a few spikes in the graph that we confirmed were due to periodic behavior by the bot. The next thing that we looked at was keystroke duration. So keystroke duration is the time that a key was held down rather than the time between key presses. For the human, we see that there are a few keystrokes that are very short. So only 3.9% are less than 0.12 seconds. And the GameBot, we see something that's much different. The GameBot has about 37% of keystrokes that are under 0.12 seconds. So the GameBot only very briefly presses keys, and the key release event is triggered right away. And we again saw some signs of periodic timing, which we confirmed by looking at the traces. So the next statistic that we looked at was the speed of point-and-click actions, and we plotted this against their displacement. Essentially what we're looking for is the relation between the speed of a movement and the distance between the start and the end. So if we look at the human distribution, which again is on the right in blue, we can see that if we look at any specific displacement value, that there's a variety of different speeds that go along with that displacement value. So humans' speed varies at any particular displacement value, though generally movements that have higher displacement are slightly faster on average. And then if we look at the GameBot data, we can clearly see that there's a linear trend in the speed increase. So you can see several lines on the graph that show linear trends. The other thing that actually is very interesting, but it's a little bit hard to notice, is if you look at the left-hand side of the graph, you can see that there are a number of high-speed moves. Those are right on the axis. So the number of high-speed moves that have a displacement of 0. So that essentially means that the bot very quickly moved the mouse around and then ended on the exact same pixel, which is something that is extremely difficult for a human to do with an actual mouse, but very easy for a bot to do. The next thing that we looked at was movement efficiency for both point-and-click and drag-and-drop actions. So the movement efficiency is the travel distance. It's the displacement divided by the travel distance. And that tells us how efficient a move is. So if the travel distance and the displacement are equal, that's a movement efficiency of 1.0. So that tells you that the move followed a perfectly straight line. Whereas if the travel distance is much larger than the displacement, then that's an inefficient move, or a less efficient move. So looking at the human graph, again on the right in blue, we can see that the movement efficiency drops rapidly. We found that this was well fit by an exponential distribution, so the decline in movement efficiency is roughly exponential. And we also noticed that only 14% of those movements have perfect efficiency. Generally, those movements were very short movements, so you can follow a straight line, but only for a few pixels. So if you just move over a little bit and click, once in a while that will have 1.0 movement efficiency. The GameBot, on the other hand, gave us a much different result. We found that over 80% of its moves had an efficiency of 1.0, including some very long moves, which is clearly very difficult for humans to do. The next thing that we looked at was the average velocity of point-and-click actions. So we plotted this so that you can see what the average speed was in different directions, and that's our average velocity. So if you look at the GameBot, which is on the left-hand side in red, you can see that there's not an obvious pattern. Basically the speeds in different directions are somewhat random. So there's not a clear correlation between speed and direction. Whereas if you look at the human data, there's clearly a very distinct pattern here. You'll notice that the pattern has faster moves on the diagonals. The pattern is roughly symmetrical, and it's bounded at about 400 pixels per second. So one of the things that is kind of interesting about this is that the moves on the diagonals were faster than those on the horizontal and vertical. If you normalize for the distance of moves, then you actually get the opposite trend. So it's partly this way because the diagonals give you more distance to move, and thus you're able to move faster. But it's clear that this pattern is much different for the bot and the human. So based on the results from our gameplay characterization study, I'm going to talk about the system that we're proposing, or that we proposed. So this is the HOP system. So it uses a behavioral approach. We call these human observational proofs. So basically the idea is that based on looking through the traces and looking at the statistics, we found that there are certain tasks within the game that are difficult for bots to perform in a human-like manner. So one example of this is when the bot wants to pick up an item off the ground, it actually can't see the location of the item. It knows it killed a monster, so it knows there's some treasure on the ground that it wants to go and pick up. So what it actually does is it moves the cursor in a grid-shaped pattern, and each time it moves the cursor, it pulls the pixel that's underneath the cursor, and if it sees a color change, it knows that the icon changed from an arrow to a hand icon, and that tells it that there's an item there that you can pick up. So once it turns to a hand icon, it clicks the cursor and picks up the item. So because it can't visualize the location of the item, it uses this trick in order to accomplish the same task as a human that's able to see that item. Another issue that the bot has is that there are certain obstacles in the game that it's not able to see. So there's things like bushes, trees, rocks, that when the bot walks up to, it's not able to move any longer in that direction. So the bot actually scans the memory of the game and finds its grid coordinates in the game, and if it's walking and its grid coordinates stop changing, it knows it's hit an obstacle. But doesn't know the shape of the obstacle, so the approach that it uses is it walks backwards, it turns to the right a few degrees, and then it walks forward again. If it gets stuck again, it repeats this. So it keeps doing this until it clears the obstacle. The other thing that it does is as it walks forward, it jumps a couple of times, hoping that it'll clear the obstacle by jumping. So this is clearly very robotic behavior that it uses. because it's not able to see that there's an obstacle in front of it. And there's some other tasks within the game that follow these kinds of patterns. So what we do is we passively observe these differences, and then we build this HOP-based game-bot defense system. So this system effectively monitors the user continuously and is always checking if the user is still a human and not a bot. And one of the advantages of this approach over human interactive proofs is that this is transparent to the user, so you're not presenting them with a test. One of the issues with human interactive proofs is that the user can always pass the test and then turn the bot on, whereas if you're continuously monitoring, then you don't have that issue. And with a human interactive proof, you have to repeatedly test and make sure that the user is still in fact at the keyboard. So I'm going to talk about the system in a little bit more detail. So there are two main components of the system. The first is the client-side exporter. So basically, this runs on the client. For our prototype, it's a separate program, but it could be integrated into the game client itself. And that software basically transmits a stream of user input actions to the server. And then you also have a server-side component, an analyzer. And that analyzer is responsible for processing those actions as they come in from the client, and then deciding, is this client being controlled by a bot, or is it being controlled by a human? So I have a little diagram here that kind of shows roughly how this works. So you have your client that's streaming user input actions. You'll have a series of those actions. Those will get accumulated into a set of inputs, which we pass into a neural network. And then we'll get a sequence of outputs from the neural network for each set of inputs. So we continue to do this over time. So you may pass in the first 20 inputs and get an output, pass in the next 20 inputs and get a second output. And then you have a decision maker on the end that decides if it's a bot or human. And I'm going to describe these in a little bit more detail. For the neural network part of the system, we have 7 inputs for each action that we're looking at. So those inputs are the duration of a move or of a key press, or I'm sorry, keystroke, or a point and click, or whatever action we're looking at. Its distance, displacement, the move efficiency, speed, angle, and virtual key. So we input these into a neural network, and we also input several actions at the same time. So the total number of inputs that the neural network is taking is the number of actions times 7 for the 7 statistics. So if you had, say, 6 actions that you want to analyze at a time, then you'd have 6 times 7 inputs that go into your neural network. And in this case, we're using a cascade-correlation neural network. During the training process, candidate nodes are trained and added to the network, as we can see from the diagram here. So the next step is getting your output from the neural network. So the output is telling us whether the analyzed actions follow the pattern of a human or a bot. So the actual output is a value between 0 and 1. So a value close to 0 indicates a probable human, whereas a value close to 1 indicates a probable bot. And you normally have a threshold value that you have to decide that's somewhere in between. Anything over that threshold you classify as a bot. Anything under you classify as a human. So based on a series of outputs from the neural network, so we input several groups of actions, and we get a sequence of outputs. We also have a decision maker that votes on that series of outputs. So it basically works by majority. So for example, if you had 3 outputs and the outputs were bot, and then human, then you'd classify that as a bot by majority. So Next, I'm going to talk about the experiments that we performed to evaluate the prototype HOP system. So for our experimental setup, we used the traces that we collected. So we have, again, a total of 30 human players, and we have their 55 hours of traces. We also have 10 different glider profiles, and we have a total of 40 hours of their traces. And for these experiments, we used tenfold cross-validation. So basically that means that for any test, we're using a specific bot, and we're testing against a training set that does not include that bot or that human. So you basically leave out whatever you're testing against, and then you have a different training set for each sample that's left out. And that's gives you 10 different training sets with tenfold cross-validation. To fully configure the HOP system, there's a few different parameters that we need to decide. First is the number of actions that we input into the neural network. So that'll determine the total number of inputs. It also affects how long it takes for you to get a classification decision. So if you use a high number of actions, you may get more accurate results, but it takes longer for those actions to accumulate. So you have to watch the player for a longer period of time before you make your decision. The other thing we need to decide is the number of nodes to configure. So that determines how many internal nodes are in the neural network and may affect its accuracy. Using too many nodes has some disadvantages, whereas using too few also has disadvantages. Something else that you decide is a threshold. By using a low threshold, you can bias the neural network towards not misclassifying humans as bots, or by using a high threshold, you can do the opposite. So that threshold value could be 0.5 would be a neutral threshold, so that says anything over 0.5 is a bot, anything under 0.5 is a human. You can shift it back and forth depending on where you want to bias your detector. And you also have to decide the number of outputs that you're going to use for your final decisions. And that also affects how accurate the system is and how long it takes for detection. So the first step that we did was to configure the number of actions and number of nodes. So basically we set up the network and we looked at the true positive and true negative rates given different numbers of nodes and also different numbers of accumulated actions. So we graphed these and we selected a configuration that we thought gave us good results. Based on this, we ended up with 4 actions and 40 nodes. The next thing that we did was to configure the threshold value. So that tells us where to cut off between the bot and human classes, and also the number of outputs for our decision maker to use. And you'll notice if you look at the table that the number of accumulated outputs is always an odd number because we're using majority voting. So based on this, we looked for a configuration that would give us a high true negative rate. So we want to have very few false positives. So we don't want to misclassify human users as bots because that's going to hurt the user experience. So we ended up selecting a threshold of 0.75, and we used 9 outputs per decision. And that gave us good results, as you can see from the table. So based on this fully configured system, we have, again, 4 actions, a total of 40 nodes, a threshold of 0.75, and 9 outputs that are being used per decision. We came up with the following results. On average, we had a true positive rate of 0.998, and that's averaged over the 10 profiles. And then for the true negative rate, we had a true negative rate of 1.0 against our 30 human players. So this achieves our goal of having few false positives while detecting most of the bots in the sample. Something else that you can look at as far as the results is your decision time. So we calculated the decision time based on the configured number of actions and also the average time cost per action. So how long does it take for an action to be performed, and what's the resulting decision time. So if you look at this, you'll notice that, and again, humans are on the right in blue, you'll notice that the human decision time is somewhat less than for the bot. And this is because the human player uses the mouse more, so it generates more actions per time, whereas the bot uses the keyboard more, and because of that, its detection time distribution is somewhat higher. The average detection time was 39.6 seconds, so under 40 seconds. And we're able to, on average, come up with a classification decision, either bot or human. So something else that we decided to look at was the detection of other game bots. So can we use the existing system and be able to detect a bot that it wasn't trained on and in a different game? So actually, we found something called MMBot, which is a bot for the game Diablo 2. And so this is a different bot and a different game. MMBot actually works entirely through pixel scanning and mouse and keyboard automation. So it doesn't do any scanning of the memory of the game in order to dig out values. And something else that's different about Diablo 2 is that it's actually not a massive multiplayer online game. It's an online role-playing game. And the controls are very different. So Diablo 2 is an overhead isometric view, so you click on a spot on the screen, your character walks over to that spot, and you see your character from overhead. Whereas World of Warcraft is a first-person game, so you point your character where you want to go, and then you can walk forward. So that's done entirely from first person. So we ran our detection system without retraining our neural network against MMBot. We got a true positive rate of 0.86. So we're able to detect it about 86% of the time, and that's without retraining the neural network. So what this tells us is that there are certain common behaviors to bots which are independent of the game that the bot was made for. So there's certain possible invariants in game bot behavior. And then for the human, we were again able to get a true negative rate of 1.0. So there were no misclassified humans in our test. The next thing that we looked at was the resource usage of the system. So what is the overhead of running this system on a typical server? So we looked at both memory and CPU. If we look at per user, we found that if we have 4 actions and we have the 7 statistics that we use, those would take up 16 bytes to store with sufficient precision. And if we also track the outputs of the neural network as a bit array, that's up to 16 outputs times 1 bit, and that gives us 66 bytes per user of data that we need to store while a user is online. And for World of Warcraft, this is relatively small. If you scale this up to a server that has 5,000 users online, that gives you about 330 kilobytes. For CPU usage, we actually ran some tests using Pentium 4 Xeon 3 gigahertz, and we found that processor was able to process the full 95 hours of traces in 385 milliseconds. So that's roughly 300 hours of traces per second that the software is able to process. And if we look at a server with 5,000 users, that's going to work out to about 1.4 hours per second of traces that are generated by those users when they're all online at the same time. So as far as CPU is concerned, the requirements are negligible. So at this point, I'm going to just discuss a few limitations of our research. We have some experimental limitations. One is the size of the study. So 30 players is really not enough to capture all of the different variations that you have in human players. So you generally need a fairly large study to capture, for example, professional gamers may play differently than average gamers. So you need a larger study to capture all the variations that exist. Another issue actually is that this study was done mostly in the lab. So 90% of the players played in the lab. So things like the screen resolution, the mouse sensitivity, and other hardware variations don't exist on the lab system. So the lab system is a single configuration, whereas home systems can vary in all of those different ways. And then another issue actually has to do with the demographics of the character rather than the player. We didn't look at all of the different character configurations, different equipment. Some characters may have much better items. They may be higher levels than we included in the study. And of course, there are all different other games that we could have looked at. So there are other bots and other types of games that we would need to test the system against to ensure that the results would generalize. Another potential limitation is the possible evasion of the detector. Whenever you set up a detection system like this, you have to be concerned that the attacker is going to realize you're using this system and he's going to do something to get around it. So one possible attack that could be done would be to interfere with the client-side exporter. So the client-side exporter is running on the user's system, so they have a lot of control over the system itself. So the system itself is not necessarily something that you can trust. So one thing they can do is they can block the stream of user input actions. This generally would not benefit the user, since the server could just block that user if it doesn't receive the user input stream. Something else it could do would be to manipulate the user input stream in some way. So it's not clear if this would benefit the attacker, since the attacker already has control over the user input as it's going into the game itself. So manipulating the user input stream doesn't seem like it would necessarily be profitable. A different approach that the attacker could take would be to modify its game bot so that it somehow mimics the behavior of a human player. The easiest approach would be to use a replay attack. So you can record a human playing the game, and then you replay the recording in order to move through the game. The issue with this is basically that the game environment is dynamic. So if you have a pre-recorded trace, there are all these different circumstances that change in the game. Using replay attacks, you have to have a tremendous number of different recordings to deal with all the different possible situations that could occur within the game. So it's not clear that this approach would be successful. But another approach that might be more effective would be to actually develop a model of human user input. And then you use your existing bot, but whenever it moves the mouse, with a human-like distribution of speed, duration, and the different statistics that the HOP system is using. So there's not currently a a generative model that captures all the statistics that our system uses. So we're not sure how difficult it would be for someone to build a model that's capable of doing that. To summarize, we did our gameplay characterization study. We looked at a total of 95 hours of user input traces, including both bots and also humans. We found, based on those traces, that bots behave differently than humans in certain ways. And taking a closer look at those traces, we found that there were certain tasks that the bot was not able to perform in a human-like manner. Based on these observations, we developed our prototype HOP system. The HOP system basically works by exploiting the behavioral differences between humans and bots. Compared to the existing approach of human interactive proofs, HOPs have the benefits that these are transparent, so you're not presenting the user with a test that interrupts the gameplay experience, and they're also continuous. So you're constantly able to check and recheck if the behavior is still consistent with that of a human player. And as far as our results, our system was able to detect 99% of the bots within our sample with no false positives. And we believe that this effectively raises the bar for future attackers in order to evade a system like this. And I also included a little bit of further reading. There's an interesting book by Hoagland and McGraw that's entirely about exploiting online games. It does talk about game bots. It's a pretty interesting read. There's a number of other topics that are very closely related to security. And then there's also a very detailed version, a paper version of what I presented today. It's Battle of WarCraft. And that was a paper published in CCS in 2009, and that's available online. So at this point, I'll take any questions.
I have a question. I can think of 3 applications for this. One is so gamers have a better gaming experience. 2 is to prevent cheating in tournaments, and 3 is to reduce Blizzard's overhead, basically. Can you discuss any others?
Those are actually all, I think, good uses of a technology like this. One thing that actually would be kind of interesting would be to apply this outside of a gaming context. So there are other interactive applications where you could use a system like this in order to keep bots out of the system. Well, maybe some kind of web application. There's it's kind of a hypothetical question. So if you can come up with other applications, that might be an interesting research area.
So you were talking about keystrokes that basically you were capturing that the bot was bringing up. Are you actually saying that those were the soft keystrokes, or were they actual keystrokes? Because I mean, what do you classify
We
as
have you turn your mic, please.
Sorry. What do you classify as keystrokes when you're saying that you captured it from the bot?
Well, we don't know that those were actually generated by a physical keyboard. We don't think that they were. We only know what the API. There's an API in Windows that you can use. That's whatever the API that Rui uses. I don't know the name of the API offhand. But that API tells us that a key was pressed. I'm not sure whether it's hard to tell what the source of the key press was, whether it came from a physical keyboard or if it came from someone using the Windows API to generate keystrokes.
If you're actually running bots, then it definitely would not come from an actual keyboard.
Right. Yeah.
But it would come from a preset, probably a set of commands that has already been given to the bots. There should already be some amount of intelligence that the bot has, with these commands, which in reality are actual keystrokes, but they're not, because
The bot does it.
Yeah, so it's essentially just calling an API to generate those keystrokes. It actually could be possible to have a physical keyboard that's programmable that you could use to generate a bot. And actually, there are physical keyboards that have been banned for use, programmable keyboards that people have gotten accused of being bots because of using. So it could come from a physical keyboard, though the bots that we're studying it would not.
So these keystrokes, were they also intuitively driven, or were they based on the trial and error method, the way you described when the actual person of the game is moving? When you said when you're moving, let's say there's an obstacle, and it tries to figure out where the obstacle is and moves away from it. And is it on the similar lines that the keystroke 2 works? As in, it has to equate itself to a certain command, right?
Yeah, it's making an API call.
No, as in, how would it know? Rather, what I wanted to ask is, where is that intelligence that is coming from?
Where's the what?
Where is that intelligence that this is a certain command that needs to be executed?
So the developer, I think he probably wrote it in maybe C++. So he writes he has some logic that scans the game memory to determine his coordinates.
Okay.
And then if his coordinates stop changing, when he thinks he should be moving forward, then he has some other extra logic that tells the bot to follow the algorithm of walking back, turning, and walking forward repeatedly. So all that logic is programmed by the developer of the game bot. Thanks.
When you gathered all the human data, you had it broken up into different demographics as keyed by age or keyed by experience or even keyed by gender. Did you look at the human data to break it down into categories to see if any particular human group would behave more like a bot and thus could get misclassified, or did you find that most of the humans all behave the same?
There's definitely some variations in the behavior. We didn't look closely at those, but I can say based on seeing some of the players play the game, the inexperienced players didn't know how to do certain things. The reaction time was slower. Some of them couldn't kill like little rabbits because they keep walking away. But the difference between the bot and human is so great that those variations were not enough to cause humans to be misclassified.
And then a follow-up question.
Sure.
Did at any time you consider possibly that disabled gamers or visually impaired gamers would possibly be using add-ons that would look like bot behavior?
That's actually a good question. So if you were to use some kind of input device that we haven't trained against, the actual input device may cause the traits to look very different than a human does. So for example, if you used a joystick instead of using the mouse, or if you used a trackball. So those kinds of variations in the that's basically a hardware variation. They could have really significant changes. One thing that actually could be problematic is if you use a touchscreen. So touchscreen is able to make movements of the cursor that you can't do with a mouse. So a mouse, if you want to move across the screen, the cursor will track along the path that you're following, whereas the touchscreen allows you to jump from one point to a completely different point. So yeah, that's actually a very good question. Thanks.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask a question because I'm crashing this, but I was thinking about, did you do any parallel work, or has anybody on things like online examinations, medical interactive scenarios where you have to pass a certain kind of really important set of educational skills, and people might be using these instead of humans?
I haven't looked closely, but there's probably there might be some work, behavioral biometric work that would look at, can you create a behavioral profile of a user, and based on that profile detect a different, it's not the right user. That would fall into that area. And there might be existing work on that. I'm not sure.
Different user. I mean using bots to take your test for you or do
Oh,
the interactive simulations, things like that?
Yeah, I don't think that's been looked at. That would be my guess. Any other questions?
All right.
Okay, thanks a lot, guys.